The world was falling apart. Fascist Nazi shock troops of the Third Reich and their blitzkrieg had spread across Europe and northern Africa and were marching their eastern front deep into the heart of Russia. The Empire of Japan was making its conquest of the Pacific reality. 65 million human lives would be lost. 11 million would eventually be systematically exterminated by an evil war machine like the world had never seen before. To gain a foothold into Europe and take on the armies of Hitler's Nazi Third Reich, the world needed a new elite type of soldier. The paratrooper was that soldier. Changing Hearts and Minds welcomes you to a special series dedicated to the greatest generation, and specifically, the well-known story that inspired the best-selling book and HBO miniseries, Band of Brothers. Join me, Jeff Adamick, veteran of the U.S. Army where I served as a paratrooper in the 82nd, Ranger in the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, and finally as a Green Beret in 3rd Special Forces Group, as I welcome fellow veterans, other podcast hosts and personalities, and some very special guests to honor the true story, book, and television series about the greatest generation's most honored story of sacrifice, service, and leadership in the face of overwhelming evil. Lessons in Leadership, the men and history of Easy Company. Last time on Band of Brothers. D-Day's arrived. During the D-Day invasion, unfortunately, Lieutenant Meehan, the commander of Easy Company, has his plane shot down, killing him and all the men on it. Lieutenant Winters, far off course, has to police up men from Easy Company as he moves his way to the assembly area. Once at the assembly area, he's given the impossible mission of assaulting an unknown objective at Brecourt Manor, German artillery.
I never thought I'd get through D-Day, let alone the next phase or the next phase. I thought I was going to get killed instantly.
I thought one of two things, a quick death or I'd come through probably without a scratch.
I think everybody had fear. I think there's people that can handle fear. I think I was probably one of them. I think I was just as scared as anybody else, except I could think.
It's a feeling you would not let yourself down, and you would not let your comrades or your unit down.
We all had fear, but we all had training to know that you try to handle your fear and work to accomplish what you're supposed to be doing.
Welcome everyone to the newest episode of Lessons in Leadership, Band of Brothers. I am Jeff Adamick, your host, and today we are going into the next episode. Last week you guys heard Brad Taylor on here. We talked about Day of Days, which was the episode in Band of Brothers where they actually do the invasion of D-Day. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the mission that Easy Company had during D-Day, they never actually completed in that one episode, which was the taking of the town of Cerentan. So they had to add another episode in there, and I'm sure they would have come up with an episode 3 anyway. But episode 3 of the Band of Brothers show is actually called Cerentan, and it's about that. So today's guest co-host is Ben Loth. I could go into long, drawn-out, tell you everything about Ben Loth himself, but I think it'd be better off if I just let Ben himself tell you about who Ben is. Ben, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Yeah, go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Ben. That way they get an idea who you are.
I am a United States Navy corpsman, veteran, and served in Sangin, Afghanistan. I'll also be running a podcast with Eddie, doing Branding with Ben. That'll be a podcast of very interesting subjects, all through the Change Your POV podcast network.
Branding with, so if you guys are going to do you and Eddie Lazary, the flagship host of the Change Your POV network, you guys are going to be doing a show on branding. Is that going to be how to, like, individual branding, or is it going to even go into like the branding of a company?
I think it could probably go into branding of a company because I'll be interacting as a person that will need to brand a company, but predominantly it'll be branding myself and how to go about that, how to do a little bit of everything, how to be yourself, how to make sure that you're real, how to grow your network, how to brand, what you need to do, and it'll be cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, man. I think a lot of people nowadays especially don't understand the importance of self-branding, especially when they're working in business or, for a lot of these veterans getting out. We don't really, and you know how it is. We don't really get a good opportunity in the military to learn how to brand ourselves. A lot of guys get that silent professional idea, and they don't know how to sell themselves or make themselves a brand. So it's an interesting idea, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Absolutely. I'd say one of the most important things anyone could learn is learning how to market and sell themselves. If they don't know how to do that, then they can't get anywhere, and they won't get anywhere.
All right, so today on the show, we're going to be going into episode now. This is episode 4 of our actual podcast, but it's episode 3 of the actual show that HBO had on. People might get a little bit confused. Oh, why are you saying this is episode 4, but this is episode 3? That's the reason why. I had an introductory episode that went into Band of Brothers up front that didn't have anything to do with any of the episodes. It was just like a background. So we are in episode, the numerical count, we are 1 episode forward of where the actual show is. So it's episode 4 of Lessons in Leadership, but actually episode 3 of the Band of Brothers. Today we got 2, as we've done before in the past, we've got 2 character highlights we'll be doing this episode. And those character highlights this episode are going to be Private Albert Blythe and Lieutenant Harry Welsh. Ben went in, I know that you did a lot of hard work looking up the backgrounds of these guys. And guys, be advised, while you're listening to the show, you're going to hear us give a short intro to these characters. And then you're probably, if you've done a lot of this stuff yourself on the back end, you're going to be like, wait a minute, they didn't mention this or that. Just be advised, if what we don't mention happened after the show that we're talking about, you're not going to likely hear it in our character highlight focus, because we don't want to give away too much of what happens with these guys as a spoiler if you haven't seen the show. And, well, even before we go into that, Ben, there's something interesting I want to talk about. You are one of the few guys who has never seen Band of Brothers until you started to participate with doing this episode. Is that right?
Pretty much. I started watching the Pacific because the Marines are there.
Right.
Never really got into the airborne side. Something about the Army or something along those lines. And just generally didn't really care to, I don't know, I'd seen a lot of European conflict movies and different things like that, so it wasn't really something that stuck out as a must-watch for me.
Right, and so it's going to be interesting to hear your look at all the stuff that goes on in the show, being that you are recently only just watched this show and actually started to digest it. So go ahead and start telling us a little bit about the 2 characters that we got going on this show.
So we have Albert Blythe. He's played by the actor Mark Warren. He was born on the 25th of June, 1923 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After 3 years of high school, Blythe volunteered for the paratroopers on 18th August, 1942. He was made a rifleman in 1st Platoon of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th PIR, 101st Airborne at Camp Toccoa. After training, Blythe earned his jump wings at Fort Benning. Blythe is then sighted on the troop ship headed to Liverpool, England. Blythe jumped into Normandy on the 6th of June, 1944.
Yeah, he's an interesting character, Blythe, because he's not really shown before this episode, and I guess it is a spoiler alert. Guys, you're not going to see him again after this episode. So he's an interesting character, and a lot of people who have not seen the show would be like, why do you choose this guy to do it as a character highlight? And if you haven't seen the show, when you do see the show, you will understand, because he is by far the focus of this episode, for sure. So that is why he is in here. And so it's going to be interesting to go to as we unravel what actually goes down with Private Blythe, and then the actual reality of what happens to him in the real world as compared to what happens in the show. The other character highlight we have is Lieutenant Harry Welsh, who you probably, if you've been watching the show, have already gotten to know him a little bit, and we haven't talked about him yet. So we're gonna talk about him a little bit in this episode, because there's a certain part of this episode that's very interesting that I wanted to cover. Go ahead and talk to us a little bit about Harry Welsh, Ben.
Harry Welsh, he's played by actor Rick Warren, born on the 27th of September, 1918, in Lejeune County, Pennsylvania. Welsh enlisted in the Army in 1942 and volunteered for the paratroopers. He was sent to Fort Benning and was put in the 504th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division as a sergeant. However, he would often get in fights and keep being demoted to private. But his commander saw leadership potential in him, and they kept on promoting him back to sergeant. He had been busted 6 times. 3 officers decided to send him to OCS since they realized he was great for the job.
Now, this makes me wonder, man. 6 times busted down. Did they send him to OCS because they thought he was a really good leader, or did they send him to OCS to get him out of there? Because it sounds like this guy fought all the time, and maybe they just were like, send this clown to OCS, and maybe it was more like one of those things where we'll send you off to OCS to learn how to be a leader because you're shit right now as a leader. You just want to fight with everyone all the time, and possibly you're good enough to get promoted to sergeant over and over again, but you're not good enough to hold that rank because you just don't know how to friggin' maintain your composure. And maybe OCS will teach you how to be a little bit better of a leader and maybe hold your shit together. That's what I see when I see this. I see this as a historical representation of a guy who just couldn't get his shit together, getting sent off to either get rid of by his leadership or to teach him a lesson.
I agree with that. I think it's definitely one of those things that he was not able to be trained by his own peers. I think that's how he looked at everyone. So when you had so-and-so that was higher up than him, he just looked at him as a peer and someone that he could fight and beat up. When he finally went to OCS, though, I think that probably was what beat him into shape, because he wasn't around a bunch of friends. He wasn't around his peer group. He wasn't comfortable anymore.
Yeah, maybe a lot of those things where when you get to certain ranks and you hold positions of leadership after being alongside other guys, a lot of times you have to move to another place because you can't make that separation between I used to be your friend and now I'm your leader. And it doesn't just go that way with the individual who's being promoted, but it also goes that way for the people who are left behind. So one of the things you always run into with leaders in the military is, you and I came up together as privates, and now I'm a sergeant, and you're still a E3 or an E4, and you think you're going to be able to take advantage of that. And when I have to come and give you some shit, you're like, well, hey, man, come on, we're friends, and you're the one that's the problem, maybe not so much me.
Yep.
So I know that he graduated as second lieutenant and was assigned to Easy Company of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment 101st while they were at Camp McCall. Now, this is a separation from what actually happens in the show, because in the show, they show him in the first episode arriving at Camp Toccoa with the other guys there and being introduced to Lieutenant Winters and Nixon and Captain Sobel. He doesn't actually show up there. He doesn't actually link up with them until they're in Camp McCall in North Carolina, right here down the street from where I live. So that is one of the things that is not accurate in the show, where they show him showing up in Toccoa. That's not the case. He did not link up with the company and show up as a lieutenant until they were here at Camp McCall. So go ahead and why don't you jump into that last paragraph that Welsh jumped into Normandy.
Welsh jumped into Normandy on the 6th of June, 1944, and due to a misdrop, wasn't able to find Easy until the next morning. Shortly before Easy was given the task of taking Cerentan, when he joined the rest of his company, Welsh was placed in charge of 1st Platoon after Winters took charge of the company.
Yeah, so Lieutenant Meehan, the actual guy who was the commander of Easy Company after Sobel was given his walking papers. As we talked about last episode, his plane was shot down with everybody in the stick on top of it. Meehan dies. Lieutenant Winters, who is the XO and kind of in charge of 1st Platoon, he shows up at the assembly area the morning after D-Day, and after they do the assault on Brecourt Manor, he is placed in command of Easy Company, which leaves 1st Platoon kind of open. Welsh gets there, and with all the shuffling around, Winters puts Welsh in charge of 1st Platoon, which happens to be the platoon that Albert Blythe is in, which is why we're going over both these guys, because they were pretty much together in the same vicinity, at least for most of the episodes. So, what they do is they say that they were given the mission to attack Cerentan, but that was their mission to begin with. So the 82nd Airborne Division going into D-Day was assigned with taking Saint Mary-Glise, which was the French town that actually Winters landed in on D-Day, and then Winters walked all the way to the assembly area. And the 101st Airborne Division was given the job of taking Cerentan, and because of the misdrop, as you said, there were paratroopers all over the place, and none of these guys actually got to complete their mission of taking these actual towns, because the Germans were still kind of in control of the town. Now, you hear all these stories about paratroopers taking all these big chances and making all these great defeats and everything during the actual invasion, but they didn't. They're just talking about these small little victories here and there. They needed to get everybody assembled and focused on taking Cerentan. So the attack on Cerentan didn't actually occur till a day or two after D-Day because of this. And so the Battle of Cerentan was an engagement in World War II between the airborne forces of the United States Army and the German Wehrmacht. Now, the Wehrmacht is it's kind of it's all right. So we talk about, you got the United States Army, the United States Marine Corps, the Navy. Those are each individually military, in military units inside the military of the United States. But the United States military as a whole is just called the military, right? So the word German Wehrmacht is the word for the German military as a whole. It is what you would call the SS units, the Luftwaffe, and all these other units as a whole. So when you hear the word Wehrmacht, you're talking about the German military as a whole, all the units together, whether it was Nazi-influenced units, non-influenced units, their airborne units, their paratroopers, their tankers. It's just a one over the world. I guess it's like a broad term for everybody as a whole. So the battle took place between the 10th and 15th of June, 1944, which, like we said, the 6th of June was D-Day. The battle didn't start till the 10th and then didn't end till the 15th. And it was within the city of Cerentan, France. The objective of the attacking American forces was the consolidation of the U.S. beachheads and establishment of a continuous defense line against expected German counterattacks. So they needed to have this city to be able to set up a prevention of the Germans to counterattack the beaches and prevent the U.S. and the Allied forces from continually just pouring their forces into the beaches. Cerentan was defended by 2 battalions of the Fallschirmjäger Regiment. See, that's me trying to read a word. That's it. Cerentan was defended by 2 battalions of the Fallschirmjäger Regiment, of the 6th Parachute Regiment of the 2nd Fallschirmjäger. Now, if you look at it, it looks like it says Fallschirmjäger, and we know that Jäger means hunter, and Fall, I think, means to actually fall. So I think this is their word for their parachute regiments. And 2 OST battalions of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. So you had SS guys there and parachute regiments there from the Germans. They were ordered to reinforce Cerentan, and the attack of the 101st Airborne Division, after landing by parachute in June 6, was part of the American airborne landings. They were finally ordered on the ground, hey, you were supposed to seize this place to begin with, now you need to go seize it for sure. So that is why they moved Easy Company. And it wasn't just Easy Company, so there were multiple units of the 101st that were moved there to take it. As we know, this show is just about Easy Company, so a lot of guys in the other 101st units would kind of feel like, oh, they're not really giving us enough credit for what we did. I don't think that's the intent with the show producers. I think the show producers just have to, as we say a lot of times with this, they have to take a lot of different stories and they have to condense them down for time to be able to tell the full story. Do you think, like you see this with the Pacific too, I know that you're more familiar with that, but do you think that there's no intent by these producers to just like completely not mention other stuff? This is all done for the sake of storytelling, yes?
Yeah. It's just like how you have, the different shows like in Fury where it shows 4 tanks next to each other. Yes, that happens, but it doesn't really. Right. It's a scalability issue. It's a framing issue. It's a cinematography choice.
Right. So the episode itself, getting into the episode begins during a sunny day in Normandy. Young paratrooper, Albert Blythe, is seen staring up at the sky. And literally, guys, when you see it, he is just sitting there staring at the sky. 3 men walk by. They're Floyd M. Talbot, Private Darrell C. Parrells, and Private Wayne A. Sisk. So these are 3 characters you've kind of gotten to know on and off during the show. We're not going to go into who they were. They're irrelevant for this. Those just happen to be the 3 guys that come by. They notice Blythe, and they are apparently surprised, since he's the first man of Easy Company they've seen since the drop. Which is weird, because their 3 are together, and they're all from Easy Company. But they always say, this is the first guy from Easy Company that they've seen since the drop. What about the 3 guys you've been walking with? They're all from Easy Company. Did you guys all jump together under the same parachute? I never understand that whole implication. Oh, you're the first guy from Easy Company we've seen. Well, what about the 3 of you? Did you guys land together? Because you had to have found each other. But that's I think that's just my picking on the way it's portrayed there. But Talbot calls out to Blythe. He answers and comes over. He explains that he got separated during the jump, which is not a big deal because everyone got landed all over the place. And the 3 men say that they got lost as well, and that they've been fighting with the 502nd. Blythe says he's just been trying to find Easy Company, and Blythe decides to tag along, but decides to tag along is kind of a weird way to put it. I highly doubt those guys would have let Blythe just stay there staring at the sky. I'm sure they took him along with him. And as we go into it, what is your impersonation of the condition that Blythe's in? I mean, he really looks like he doesn't. I'm trying to find a way to put this politely. He doesn't have the 1,000-yard stare to me. There's something else going on with him. He just looks out of it.
I think he's just overwhelmed as a whole. I mean, he just jumped in. It's finally, I think it was it daytime that they met him?
Yeah, it was that morning. Remember, it's like the morning's coming up and he's sitting there staring at the sun coming up. Just kind of like, again, it's not a 1,000-yard stare, but he's not with it.
I would definitely say it was along the lines of looking at it and just being like, wow, what did I get myself into? This is scary. I'm in Germany or France, actually, but close enough.
Close enough. At the time, under German occupied, German occupied France. So it's Germany as far as the Germans are concerned.
You're in the heart of enemy territory. You just landed. All you have around you is other infantry with small arms, and you're looking at it, and just from a top-down perspective, there's no reason the Panzergrenadier battalions shouldn't just run you all over.
Right.
But
what
you're stuck here.
Yeah, you're stuck here. And what I think is interesting is, and I think a lot of people don't take this into account. You know as well as I do, being in Afghanistan, that when it's dead quiet, man, you can hear for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear for things that are way far away when it's dead quiet. Now you enter this situation where every noise that you hear, if you're alone, and he's alone, every noise you hear is combat related. I mean, there's no, you can't find a way to turn that doesn't sound like there's death and destruction happening. And so for someone like him who, from what I gather and kind of agree with you on, is him being a little overwhelmed, that whole, he didn't know what he was getting into kind of thing, which a lot of them didn't, but I think he's really hyper focusing on it.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know where to go. He doesn't have he's just like, oh my God, everything I hear, everywhere I look, it's dawn's coming up. He's seeing the light for the first time, but all night long, every time he looked off in the distance, all he's seeing is anti-aircraft fire and hearing explosions and seeing planes fall out of the sky. So it must have been an apocalyptic type of situation that they were in that night before. And with that, you can almost understand why the guy just doesn't seem to, again, it's difficult to talk about because people will confuse it with being afraid and being a coward. I don't think that's what was going on. He just looks like he just doesn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. I don't feel like, there's a difference between being scared to inaction, being scared and just in wonderment and all of that stuff. And I think he was very much so in the stage of, let me sit down and process this. The sun's rising. I'm in German-occupied France, and what do I do now? Oh, right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for picking me up. I'm going to tag along.
Yeah.
Let me snap out of it.
That's a really good way of putting it, and I think that's really what kind of went on with him.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions with this episode as to what's going on with Blythe, and that's why I really was looking forward to this episode, because I want to put to rest what's actually going on with him. Too many people consider what is coming up in this episode to be a show of fear. And I don't think that's what's going on, in my opinion. So we'll get to it when we talk about. But so they get back together. They consolidate. There's all this kind of interaction between different guys, and all that's irrelevant. What I do want to talk about is the next movement. So it's the next night, right? And they're moving. And why don't you talk to us about what happens between Albert Blythe and Nixon with finding that one dead German and what the German has on his uniform.
That's Edelweiss. That only grows in the Alps above the tree line, which means he climbed up there to get it. It's supposed to be the mark of a true soldier.
So the German has on his uniform a little flower.
Right.
The little flower is called an Edelweiss.
Edelweiss.
I think that's
Edelweiss.
Edelweiss.
Yep.
Let me throw in the German accent.
Sure.
It's a flower that's mainly found in the Swiss Alps, and this flower is typically worn by mountain divisions and within the Austrian and the German armies, Austrians and Germans. It was predominantly a World War I sort of thing. It was kind of like a macho, well, not so much macho, but a show of strength. It's kind of like how certain devices that the military gets today show kind of, I've been there, I've done that.
Kind of like a
Yeah.
CIB on the U.S. Army or
Mhm.
or it's like airborne wings.
Combat action
Airborne
rhythm.
wings. Airborne wings would be a good indication of this is something.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit better than everyone else. Macho.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of that, but the weirdest part was that I think it was on a division that would never go to the mountains.
Right.
So maybe there was something a little
there's a lot of
little
stuff
lacking.
There's a lot of stuff you can find online to talk about how this
Mhm.
maybe just was put into the show as a metaphor for something else, because they would not have run into these guys in that place.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It is odd, but I think it's meant to show, because Nixon goes when Nixon's explaining to, and for those of you who are like a little confused right now, they go to do a movement that next night after everything's consolidated, and while Blythe is walking through the woods or walking through this meadow, he sees what he looks like a German holding a gun on him, but it happens to be a dead German against a tree, and he has this
Mhm.
moment of freaking out, like, fuck, I thought he got me. And Nixon walks up, and Nixon goes into, what is this guy, and what is this thing he's wearing on his uniform? And Nixon says the whole, it's the sign of a true soldier or something like that.
Mhm.
And that's like you said, that's a misrepresentation of what it actually is. But for the sake of the show and for the sake of the storytelling, sure, we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Because it does affect the storyline
Uh-huh.
and the character arc of Blythe.
And I have no issues with that. I was in the military for too long to think that every single military movie is accurate or show is accurate. So with that being said, I think the representation there is very much so along the lines of Blythe. You guys were fighting real soldiers. We're fighting warriors. We're fighting the epitome of what is an actual military, and you're no shit in combat.
Yeah, because I think at that point, that's a good way of putting it, because I think Blythe still at this point doesn't really get it.
Yeah.
I think he's just kind of like, wait a minute, this isn't like training. They're really
Mhm.
there's dead bodies around. There's just people shooting back at me. So they get just outside Carrington, and Easy Company approaches the town of Carrington. Winters checks it and tells Welsh to lead first platoon, while he comes up with second and third platoons into the Carrington proper, if you would. After taking one last look on his watch, he turns to Welsh and says, "Go." Welsh then gets up with a couple of men and runs into the town. I mean, just runs into the town. It's really just a really odd scene, because it's just like they're all lined up along this road outside the town. He's like, "All right, man, get up and go." And Welsh and first platoon just get up and just run into the town. Like it reminds me of Harrison Ford chasing the stormtrooper in Star Wars, just to turn the corner into a room full of stormtroopers, because that's kind of what happens. Because a German machine gun opens up on him. The two men go down that were with him from the machine gun burst, and the rest of the men hide in ditches as more machine guns fire at them. Private Lutz and Welsh, I don't think they notice this. They just keep running, and they run right into the middle of the town, and they don't know where everyone is. And they're like kind of stuck up there in the town by themselves, and everyone is behind them taking cover from the fire that's coming in. Compton and Winters get the men up out of the ditches. Blythe lags behind, and they purposely show this. It's not that he's not getting involved. He just seems to not be. He doesn't know what to do. Like, guys get up and run, and he just kind of like hangs out behind. Winters pushes Blythe up, and more men are killed during the charge. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on in this scene. There's the image of guys getting blown up running into buildings. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most intense fighting scenes in the entire series.
Yep.
And one of the things I always remember is the one round or the grenade goes off, and Donnie Wahlberg's character takes some shrapnel to like the groin area, it looks like, and he's laying there, and then they have to rip. You know what I mean? They go to rip open his thing to make sure that his manhood is still intact, and he's got this look on his face like, because there's a lot of blood there. He's like, "Oh man, I think I just lost my shit."
Yeah,
but he doesn't. He doesn't. That's always a scene that sticks with me.
Every single I told all my Marines that I worked with, I was like, "Hey, just to let you know, if anything happens, the shrapnel's going up into your crotch. So we're gonna have to check that, and I'll let you know if it's working." or if it looks good. And remember telling all my Marines, "Yep, everything's still there. You're good to go."
Yeah, it's
exactly like that. Like
right.
exactly like he said. That was the funny part.
Which is why one of the things that I think, you being a corpsman, and I was a combat medic for a long time before I became a Green Beret, and it is something that a lot of guys worry about. And it's funny because, like you said, that scene is very accurate as to how a lot of guys react to that kind of situation, including the medics, where the medics will be like, "Let me check. All right, man, everything's good, dude. It's all still there. It's all still working." And that look on his face, you've seen it, and I've seen that look before on people's faces when you have to check.
You're like, I don't want to look, but I'm going to for you.
Right.
You're good to go.
Yeah.
Carry on.
And by the way,
you'll
buddy,
have kids.
By the way, buddy, nice what you're working with down there. No,
I wouldn't go that far.
No, you never. Hey, man. hey, all your stuff is still there. And by the way, congratulations. That's some nice.
Sadly, the majority of them I couldn't.
You wouldn't be able to do it. It crawls up real quick. It crawls up real fast in one of those situations.
I'd say only one of the guys was completely conscious enough that I could joke with him.
Right.
And that guy chronically took shrapnel. I don't know what his deal was, but he just wanted to find all the shrapnel and have it stick to his chest. Jesus. I was like, "Really? What happened to you, man?" He's like, "I don't know. I got hit again." I go, "Really? Why? Come on. You just wanted a break, didn't you?"
I mean, I think every unit's got that one guy that just, no matter how much they try, they just can't afford. They can't avoid being the fodder for all the explosions and shrapnel that's flying through the air.
Mm-hmm. It was only enough damage to get him sent away, so he could be cleaned up, and then he'd come back in. It was never enough that he'd be done and out of action for the rest of the deployment, though.
Right. It was just enough to get him sent back out for a couple days, so he can be sent back to be the next guy to get hit with the bare amount, the bare minimal amount of shrapnel.
Just enough so he could be medevaced.
Just enough for a Purple Heart, but not enough for a trip home.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So there is also another scene. Private Malarkey and Private Muck are firing at snipers that are firing on them, and they notice a chaplain named Father Maloney bending over the dead and wounded in the open, saying small prayers to them. And Muck goes, "Hey, Malark, do you see what I'm seeing?" And then Malarkey just goes, "Yeah, crazy fools, us Irish." And then they just keep firing. But it's a scene that I think that during World War II is actually probably more often than not something that happened, where these chaplains who would just walk out into the middle of combat, thinking that they were going to be completely fine. And I'm not saying that they weren't, because these stories are only impressive because they happened. But these guys, these chaplains who went out there, the chaplains and the medics, I think during World War II, they're not unsung heroes. I mean, everyone knows about them and talks about them all the time. But I don't think people really realize, as well as you and I do, how much danger these guys put themselves in to be able to help out their friends and their brothers and everything. And I think that's something that I'm glad later on that there is a whole episode just on the medic in Band of Brothers. But I don't think it shows how much, during the D-Day or here during the Battle of Cerentan, how much these guys put themselves in harm's way to help their brothers out.
We're trained so well to make sure that we don't run into the minefield with raking machine gun fire, and all that stuff going on, that we look at the guy and go, I'll help you out because I feel bad and I like you and you're, my best friend. But the training in us tells us, no, you're not going out there. And I don't think the medics and the corpsmen in World War II got the same sort of training. They were taught, wear your armband, you won't get shot.
Which is not true. You're fighting the Nazis.
Yeah.
It may be they may be the evilest, war machine in the history of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that your white banded Red Cross was nothing more than a target for these guys.
I don't completely agree with that. I think a lot of the troops there were probably as likely to shoot the medic as they were to shoot the chaplain.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, they were regular people too, and they probably looked at them and were like, hey, if I don't shoot this guy, that's all right. Versus, when you see it in the faces in this show, especially I have to kill them because they're going to be a threat later, not because I actually want to kill them. And
Right,
I think that's what's going on, and that's why the chaplains and the medics survive relatively long by comparison. You can't control your machine gun when you're shooting a burst down a hallway, and the medic jumps out. But, if the guy's already down and then you see a person run up with a Bible, all right, you don't really need to shoot him.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of people forget that not every single German was a member of the Nazi Party.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, only the SS units were full Nazi units. Those were the real evil ones. I mean, you got a regular German military unit. These guys were members of the military for Germany before the Nazis took over. Very likely to have been members of the German military after World War II. And they were not necessarily evil, anti-humanity people like the SS and the Nazis themselves were. I will never, ever say that the Nazis and the SS were good, but I will not say that all the German units, like you're mentioning here, they're not all the evil guys that
Exactly.
media has portrayed them to be. A lot of these guys were just, career soldiers. Guys like, for God's sakes, Erwin Rommel was a member of the SS Party by necessity, and was one of the guys that tried to get Hitler assassinated. And he was one of the biggest German heroes. Even before World War II, he was well known.
Yeah.
And this guy ended up having to pay the price and committing suicide because he tried to have German. And he's a good example of guys who were part of the German military machine, but were not part of the Nazi Party.
There's a great YouTube channel. Do you want me to mention it?
Yes, go ahead.
The military history visualized. He's a really cool guy. He'd be able to pronounce all these German names correctly, but he had a podcast recently where he talks about how the Wehrmacht actually was able to keep fighting was because they'd have summary executions, and like in World War I, they had like under 100 or under like 200 or 300, something under 1,000. But I think it was over 1,000 people killed in executions, and that's what kept the Germans fighting. Right. And that's why they were still fighting and still willing to fight, even though, at the D-Day time span, they could have still won. But later on down the line, when it's, 1945 and the Russians are on one side of them and the rest of the Allies are on the other side, why would I keep fighting? Well, I'm going to get killed if I don't keep fighting. I'm going to be killed in disgrace.
The Nazis used fear among their own people just as much as they used it among everyone else.
Yeah. So that was kind of an interesting thing, is how many people were killed for disobeying orders and different things like that, and how much higher it was versus World War I, which was worse.
Right.
Yeah. I'd rather serve in World War II as a Nazi or as a German than I would have as a World War I German,
Oh, yeah.
The
fighting in the no man's land and the trench warfare was terrible itself, so... Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people don't take into account. So during the battle, getting back on track, during the battle, Albert Blythe has this moment where, and they show in the episode, where he goes blind. He gets medically evacuated back to the aid station through talking back there with certain people and all that kind of stuff. His vision comes back. But what I want to talk about now is this is where I want to get into what's going on with Blythe. So hysterical blindness is what happens to him. And what I think a lot of people misconstrue is that he was afraid. And let me tell you something, guys. Yes, he was afraid. But so was Winters. So is Spiers. So is every other person that ever goes to war. They're all afraid. All right? Because that's human. That's a human response to your mortality, is to be afraid. There is, like, you hear people talk all the time, oh my God, this guy, he's fearless. He did it without fear. He's courageous. And to me, it's a misrepresentation of the truth, because without being afraid, you can't have courage. Courage is pushing through fear to do things. If you're just fearless and you do things, then that means you have no regard for your own safety. And that is not brave. That is insanity. So
completely agree with that.
So he's having this reaction, this fight or flight, where his body is not wanting him to go any further. But Albert Blythe, guys, is just as much a Tacoma man as the rest of these guys in Easy Company. He wants to get out there and help. He keeps pushing himself beyond where his body and his physiological responses want him to go, to the point where his body just shuts his eyesight off. And that is not based on him being a coward. That is based on his body just is not up. It's not at the same level of his mindset where he wants to do what he wants to do, what he's willing to do. It's his ability to push and try to go fight when his body wants him to stop that causes this hysterical blindness. It's not cowardice.
The most amazing part about this hysterical blindness was the reaction from the medic. The medic looks at him and goes, "Yeah, there's nothing more I can tell you about it, but he is what he is." And he actually kind of was defensive for Blythe to the other officers or to the other leadership, saying, "No, he should stay here until it's better." And I think that was a big aspect of why he got better, was that caringness. As a corpsman, I have to say, well, Marines are a bunch of hard asses and they know what's going on. A little bit of caring goes a long way. And just sitting there and going, you know what? I care about your well-being. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Will make someone feel so much better. And little things or big things like hysterical blindness will go away.
Right.
Like, it's amazing.
You see that because Dockerow does, tell everyone, hey, kind of leave him be, let him be over there. But then Winters goes over and talks to him and just talks to him not like accusatory or anything else. Winters is just like, hey, man, he goes, how are you doing? What happened? Talk to me about what's going on. And immediately, like midway through the conversation, Blythe's sight comes back. And where I know that this isn't as far as the storyline is concerned, why this isn't cowardice by Blythe, is the second that Blythe gets his sight back, he gets up and goes right back to his unit without anybody telling him, hey, you got to go back there. Hey, come on, man, let's get out here. He just gets up and goes back to his unit. And that to me is an indication of where his mindset is. He wants to be where he's at. He is not running from the fight. He's trying to run to it while his body is trying to stop him from doing it. So next time you see the show, for those of you out there who think Blythe is just a coward, realize that Blythe does everything he can to push past his body's inadvertent physiological response to danger, because nobody can, and I know that Ben backed me up on this, you cannot predict your reaction to a life-threatening situation. I am sorry.
Exactly. No
matter if you're out there saying, well, if I was in that situation, I would do this. If I was in that, you have no idea what you're going to do. When fight or flight kicks in, you have no idea if your body's going to go into fight or flight. You have, and you cannot predict it. Each time, and each time it could be different. There's been moments where I was struck with something that wasn't even as bad as the last time, where I felt more like I need to get the hell out of here than I felt like I need to push forward and fight. And I never had the hysterical blindness like Blythe had, but I've certainly had to push through my body telling me, no, get out of here. So I understand it.
Yeah, it's completely a very much so. You don't know until you're in the situation, and you don't know specifically what you're going to do till you're in that specific situation. When you're, it's like the big dog versus the little dog kind of thing. It's like sometimes it will fight, sometimes it won't.
Right.
You don't know, until you're in that specific situation. You know what? I might look at all those German tanks coming by or whatever else and be like, I'm going to take them all out. I'm going to get myself a Medal of Honor. And that might be in my head, and I'll actually do that. Or it might be, those are German tanks. What am I going to do about that? I don't have a tank. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to sit here in my hole. You don't know.
Right. And I will say that person who thinks he's going to go off and win the Medal of Honor is more than likely going to be the one who shits his pants. And that's not meant to be a bad thing. And the reason why is because if you've gotten into your head that this is who I'm going to be, and then when you get in a situation and you feel that fight or flight kick in, and you really get, and I'm not talking about I'm a little bit afraid of this or that, but I'm talking about true fear. When true fear hits you and you feel that, if you've gotten it into your head that you're going to be a fucking war hero, not understanding what that means, and then you get hit with this feeling of total petrifying fear, you're going to react to yourself in a way that you're not used to. You're going to find you're mentally going to start to think, I'm not the person I thought I was, and you have this. That's why I tell you, don't go around
downward spiral.
Yeah, don't go around talking shit about what you're going to be and what you're going to do. Just prepare yourself for the worst situation and then do your best to get through it as best you can. And that's
Yeah.
really all you can do. Once you start telling people that you're going to be a giant war hero, you're going to be the first guy that's going to be a friggin' anecdote in a movie about this shit 20 years later. That's what's going to happen to you.
Yep.
So what was really interesting about this hysterical blindness incident is the different responses that guys give Blythe afterwards. So we have the character, the platoon sergeant or the platoon leader, Welsh. He has one way that he reacts to Blythe. He comes over to Blythe and he's, "What's going on, Blythe?" And he just talks to him. And to me, nothing against Harry Welsh, but it sounded very condescending.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was intended to be that way, but I think for the
It's
show,
hard
it has
not to.
for the show, it has to be that way to show the different ways that people react to this kind of incident. So you got Harry Welsh being a little condescending, and Blythe, you'll be fine, man. Just drive on. And that's apparently that didn't work. Some people that would work for, but Blythe it didn't. And then you have Spiers who runs into Blythe, and this is my favorite one. Spiers is like, "Blythe, you've just got to accept the fact that you're already dead." And as much as it's a fucking fantastic scene where Spiers is just like, "Why are you afraid? You know we're all dead. War has to go on. You have to accept that you're dead." Very samurai type kind of mentality, and that seems to fucking scare Blythe even more.
Lieutenant. Sir, when I landed on D-Day, I found myself in a ditch all by myself. I fell asleep. I think it was air sickness pills they gave us. When I woke up, I didn't really try to find my unit to fight. I just kind of stayed put.
What's your name, Trooper?
Blythe, sir. Albert Blythe.
You know why you hid in that ditch, Blythe?
I was scared.
We're all scared. You hid in that ditch because you think there's still hope. But Blythe, the only hope you have is to accept the fact that you're already dead. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you'll be able to function as a soldier's supposed to function. Without mercy, without compassion, without remorse. All war depends upon it.
I mean, the look on Blythe's face when Spiers is talking to him is just, it's almost comical. Because Spiers is just totally disaffected by everything that's going on around him. And we'll talk about Lieutenant Spiers later on in another episode. But what do you think about that whole scene, that night scene where Spiers comes up to him and talks to him? To me, it's just funny.
The except that you're already dead part?
Yeah, when Spiers tells him, you just got to realize you're already dead.
It's I think it's a style that a lot of people don't necessarily get until they're in the situations that is the mentality that's warranted.
Right.
There's the pragmatic kind of attitude of, I'll just do what I'm supposed to do and I'll hopefully get through this. There's the other one of, I don't want to die at all, so I'm going to do, what I have to do. And then there's, also the other side of just accept that you're already gone. You're fighting the Germans trying to attack somewhere that's heavily fortified. It was called, the Atlantic Wall.
Yeah.
It's not called that for no reason. These guys just rolled over France a few years ago. They're still battling the Russians. They kicked England out of France in Dunkirk. It's like the epitome of who you don't want to be fighting. What else are you supposed to do? Oh, they also have these machine guns that sound like buzzsaws.
Yeah.
You can't even tell the difference between the two rounds between the two.
Right.
The closest thing you get to it is an A10. You don't.
To this day,
that's all you can do.
To this day, even in modern warfare, the German machine guns are the highest rate of fire machine guns in the history of the world. To this day.
Yeah.
They're so like what you say. It's very they are able to put down such an immense amount of firepower that it's very, very disconcerting. And and you're right. for those of you out there who haven't been in situations like this, unfortunately, Spiers does give him the best advice. Maybe not. It's maybe not the advice that needs to be heard by Blythe. I think that, and that's where we're getting to, is how Winters handles the situation. But guys, you really do. If you cannot come to grips with your mortality and accept the fact that you're already dead, then you are never going to get past those moments where you don't know what to do. That things are just so bad that, you have to, if you're worried about whether you're going to live or die, you're not going to be able to do your job in some of these situations. You've got to just accept, like I said, I'm already dead. So I might as well just do my job. And for God's sakes, if I live through it, bonus. But if I die, then no harm, no foul. I was dead anyway. And that's what Spiers is saying to Blythe. It's just not what Blythe needed to hear at that moment. And it's a humorous scene, because the look on Blythe doesn't look scared the entire episode until Spiers comes to talk to him and says that. And that's when Blythe really looks scary. And so the next morning, they get counterattacked by these German tanks. And this is the scene where you really see Winters stand out as a leader. And we'll get to that in a second, because one thing I want to talk about is Harry Welsh, him having his reserve stuffed in his rucksack.
Harry, what exactly are you doing with your reserve chute? You been hauling that thing around ever since we jumped?
Gonna send it to Kitty when we get back to England. Silk. Figure it'll make a good wedding dress, What with rationing and all.
Jeez, Harry, I never would have guessed.
What? I'm so sentimental?
No, that you think we're gonna make it back to England.
And he's got, all right, so the reserves back then, guys, were all white. They were made of silk. As we know, during World War II, there was a lot of, you couldn't buy a lot of products. Margarine exists because of World War II, because they wanted to save the butter to send over to all the troops, and everyone else had to learn how to use margarine. Steel and all that kind of stuff was tin and everything, all those drives to gather stuff up. And one of the things is silk. Silk was also not really readily available because they were using it to make all these parachutes. And so Harry Welsh has his parachute reserve, a white silk piece of silk, quite a bit of it, stuffed in his rucksack or his backpack. And do you remember this scene where the guy asks him, "What are you doing with that?"
No, I don't.
Yeah. It's a really quick passing scene that actually ends up being a very famous story during World War II. So he's standing there and he's got it stuffed in his thing, and someone just says, "Why do you have your reserve in your backpack?" And he's like, "I'm going to send it home to my girlfriend. She's going to turn it into the wedding dress." It's a funny scene because it's a famous story. He actually did. He actually sent his reserve parachute home, and his fiance turned a wedding dress into it. And I will put links to that story in the show page. But that was one of the reasons why I wanted to give Harry Welsh the highlight this episode. So when you're watching it and you see that whole scene or the little passing scene where he talks about that, realize that the producers and the writers are giving a nod to this story that's fairly famous online about this one soldier who, and I think it's actually Harry Welsh, so I don't think it's even set up for somebody else, but he did have his reserve parachute from the D-Day invasion stuffed in his bag, and he carried it around because he was sending it home so that his fiance could make a wedding dress out of it. His own wedding dress, actually. So
he was in the dress?
He wasn't. She was. His wedding. Back then, who knows? I mean, they'd have to keep it quiet. It's not like today's military where you can just openly be in a wedding dress. Back then, it was a little different. But so the next day, back to the next day. So the German tanks are overrunning, or not overrunning, but they're attacking, and it's a pretty good attack. I mean, they're kind of stuck in their positions. Everyone's fighting except for Blythe. He's literally hunkered down in his hole. And this is where I think the fear actually does start to creep in. It's the morning after Spiers tells him that he's already dead. And now he's being attacked by this overwhelming German force, and he has no idea what to do. Winters sees this, and what Winters does, man, and apparently this is a real story. Winters goes up and stands over top and starts yelling, "Come on, Blythe, give it to him. Come on, throw some." And he just starts shooting and stands there, and Blythe watches in amazement as Winters is like, he's standing over his foxhole, wide out in the open, in with the Germans firing down. And And Winters is just shooting, and Winters is showing him that he can do it, and not ridiculing him, not getting into his shit, not saying things to him like, Blythe, you're already dead. But he's saying, look, Blythe, just do what I'm doing. Just get up, take one shot, and then just find another target and take another. Come on, give it to, throw some rounds downrange. You know what you're doing. And Blythe does. He turns around, he gets on the edge of the foxhole, and he starts firing, and it's almost immediate, man. Blythe drops his first German, and he's completely out of it. And to me, I think it's a good indication of the type of leadership styles that you can use, but that not any of the three types, not what Welsh did, not what Spiers did, and not what Winters did, are wrong. All three of them are effective methods to motivate and get people to get their job done. But what I think you learn in this is that not every single one works for every single person.
Yeah, that's all too true about that. Is every single person. I think I was doing like an O course. I'm not a big fan of heights. I know that sounds terrible.
No,
the obstacle course.
Yeah.
First time on it, not very high up. I didn't have trouble climbing the rope. Anyway, so we're going over the first one, the first log or something, and it's, I don't know, maybe 5-6 feet up. And I remember someone yelling at me like, is this how you're going to be or something? And like, that worked that time.
Right.
But there's other times that people are like, is this how you're going to be? And I'm like, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it is. Leave me alone. That's not helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's just, you have to realize as you're watching this and you're trying to break down how this gives leadership lessons, is that the lesson here in this episode is that there's more than one way to approach having to motivate people.
Yeah.
And that not all of them are right, not all of them are wrong. They all work for different people, different times. Like we said, for someone like me, Welsh and Spiers, probably that would have worked. A little bit of, hey, dude, quit being a pussy, or a little bit of the, hey, you just got to accept the fact that you're dead. That would have worked for me, but for Blythe, did nothing to him but make it worse. And then Winters gets up and does what he does, and it works. And the reason why it's important is because all three of these gentlemen, Spiers, Welsh, and Winters, are all known to be good leaders, and they are. There is not. For Welsh being looking a little bit like a douche by giving him shit, Welsh was still a very well-respected leader. He did learn his lesson by going to OCS and getting put in charge of different men. That's the point that I think people need to take from this, is that if you're trying to motivate someone and the method you're using isn't working, you have to be a good enough leader to realize that you may have to adjust your method, not expect them to adjust to you, but you have to adjust the way you're doing things to the individual to get them to react to it. And it's just about approach. It doesn't violate or sacrifice anything else as far as a leader is concerned, but it's just a different approach to how you deal with individual people based on their personalities.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I had a recruit or a Marine or someone else that I was taking care of, and they had some sort of simple injury, and sometimes just calling them names and telling them the Navy was beating them would get them moving. Other times they'd be like looking at me, no, this really hurts. And I'd be like, all right, I'll help you up. Here you go. Here's some kindness.
So at the end of the battle, he walks up, and this is where it comes full circle with the Edelweiss. The German that he does shoot during the battle that gets him to snap out of his episodic fear that he was in is got the Edelweiss. And so he takes that and he puts it on his uniform. And it's a very good metaphor for him finally feeling like he belonged there and finally felt like he was actually able to do his job. They expanded even more by showing like a jump forward a couple weeks later. They're moving towards a farmhouse. And when nobody else wants to take the lead to walk up to the farmhouse, Blythe is like, I'll go.
Yep.
And this is actually a bit of a sad portion of the show because he's like, I'll do it. I'll go. And they're like, okay. Blythe goes up and gets immediately shot in the neck by a sniper. And he drops to the ground and he's shot. They're getting ready to medevac him and then get pulled back because they're getting sent back to England. It's like, Jesus Christ, if you would have just waited 5 minutes, like if Blythe hadn't volunteered so quickly, they'd have been pulled back before they even went up to that farmhouse and Blythe wouldn't have been shot. And so then they go into the showing Blythe in the hospital, and everyone's talking about it. And as they're showing him there, they make mention that Blythe is going home. At the end of the episode, they say he's never going to get better and that he dies from his wounds. Well, he didn't, guys. Albert Blythe did not die from those wounds, and he did not get killed. Blythe was released from the Army Hospital October 8th, 1945, which has been verified by his discharge paperwork at the end of World War II. He attended the first annual reunion with the 101st Airborne Division. He returned to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and started a career with Westinghouse Electric. So he didn't die, guys, because he also served in Korea with the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team, and after the end of hostilities was later assigned to the Military Assistance Advisory Group in Taiwan. He never did retire from military service, though, guys. On October 10, 1967, while on active duty in Germany, Blythe felt nauseated when he returned from a weekend at Bastogne, where he had taken part in the ceremonies commemorating the Battle of the Bulge. On December 11, 1967, Blythe was taken to an emergency room at West Baden Hospital in Germany, where he was admitted and diagnosed with a perforated ulcer. He died in intensive care on December 17th after surgery and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. Again, like we said, it says in the show that he died in December 17th, 1948, never fully recovering from his wounds. He did not. He died on December 10th, 1967, from a perforated ulcer, not affiliated at all with what happened to him. And it kind of makes it's a overlook, and it's an actual mistake by the show. It's well known to be just a blatant mistake by the fact checkers and the producers. But again, if this is the worst mistake that they have in the entire show, that is just blatantly not written to be a time saver or a combination of stories, but this one is a legitimate, they just fucked up, then that's not that bad for a show that got that much history behind it. We're here to tell you that Blythe not only recovered from these wounds, he went on to fight in Korea and had a very long and illustrious career, and did die, but died while in the military in Germany, but just died from a perforated ulcer from something else. It wasn't what the show led it on to be. And I think that's a little unfortunate that a lot of people think that Blythe died this guy who only ever, did one good thing and spent the rest of the time afraid. And I think that you got to look deeper into the show to see what the story is that they're telling you about Albert Blythe.
No, I mean, I thought that was kind of interesting how they missed that. I mean, it's a shot to the neck or the collarbone or the upper chest. It looks like it's pretty deadly. Yeah. And I don't blame them for considering it that. Along with the rest of his guys, I guess, they didn't know that he survived. They were all told that he was just sent back or something like that. And so they didn't see any further. And I do have to say that kind of makes sense, because I didn't know if any of the guys that I took care of didn't make it or made it until, the next day or 2 days later or, more than that. And that's with internet communication and all that stuff. Right. I couldn't imagine, it isn't like you're going to send out letters to all the troops that are in the process of storming through fortified Germany. Right. Right. Oh, hey, by the way, so-and-so made it. So out of all the flaws they could have, that one's not too bad.
That's what I'm saying. It's not that. I mean, it's a big, for Albert Blythe and his family, they may find it, well, he didn't die in 48. He lived in, we got it. We understand that, but for the overall aspect of the show, if that's the worst mistake they make, then that's actually pretty good, considering, as me and Ben will tell you, there are a lot of shows out there that make some glaringly bad mistakes as far as historical accuracy. And so one of the things about Band of Brothers, guys, is it does a very good job of keeping these stories correct and being accurate. And so that's one of the things they're applauded for, is their ability to keep this stuff right. So if this is the worst of it, not too big of a deal.
Absolutely.
I want to say thanks, Ben, for coming on, man. I appreciate you coming on, guys. Obviously, this is the end of the episode. We talked in depth about the Battle of Carrington. We talk about Blythe and his and that was the big thing I wanted to talk about this episode was what actually happened with Blythe and the misconceptions that people have over whether or not he was just a coward, and that wasn't the case. I will link the story of Harry Welsh's wedding dress, not him personally, but his fiance's wedding dress made out of a parachute to the show notes page. I will also link Albert Blythe's Wikipedia storyline, so you can go and check out what really happened to Albert Blythe in the long run. Just like we said, there's more of it. He fought in Korea and stuff like that, so you can look all into that. But the Battle of Carrington, man, it was very, very important for them to get through, and there's actually a whole. I will link the Battle of Carrington to the actual show notes page too, and if you read into that, it's actually it's a multiple day affair, and I think that the Easy Company portion of the battle is a small part of what ended up being a very important battle in World War II. Ben, before we leave, man, do you have any like social media links or any places that people can follow you and come check you out?
I've got my Facebook. Later on, you'll be seeing the podcast that I'll be doing with Eddie Lazary on Change Your POV Network, and that one will be Branding with Benjamin. So that'll be a walkthrough on everything branding related, a few interviews of special guests, and a lot of off-the-cuff learning. And it'll be very, very humble and very much so. You want to learn how to do this, this is how you do it. You run to your fear, and you do stuff that you've never done before, and you reach out and you figure it out.
Nice, kind of like what they talked about with Blythe, running to your fear and just facing it. Huh?
Yeah,
good stuff.
Almost exactly like that.
Good stuff, brother. All right, well, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate you being on, and like I said, you guys will find all of the links to Ben and all his stuff going on. That will all be in the show notes page too, and we will come back next week, picking up with the next episode. So if you guys are out there, get on the Facebook page for Lessons in Leadership and go ahead and talk and discuss. I will definitely post some thought-provoking questions up there on the Facebook page. That's Lessons in Leadership Band of Brothers. Search for it on Facebook. You can find it. You can also find it through Changing Hearts and Minds Facebook page, and that links to it also from there. And you can go and join that group. Come on and talk to not just myself, but also these hosts are actually members of the group too, and they get on there and they talk about stuff and the same things. So if you want to tell Ben that he's wrong, get on there and tell him that you thought he was wrong, and Ben will come back and he'll open a discussion. Just don't abuse my guests, all right? So, but you can come on and talk about whether or not you agree or disagree with something. So we'll talk to you guys next week. I want to thank you again, Ben, for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will talk to you guys next week.
Lessons in Leadership Band of Brothers is a production of Changing Hearts and Minds, hosted by Jeff Adamick on the Change Your POV podcast network. You can find other amazing shows on the network by going over to changeyourpov.com. Huge thanks goes out to all the amazing guests featured in the episodes of this series. First, our very own network hosts, Eddie Lazary and Bennett Tanton, hosts of Change Your POV podcast and Attack Friday. Dwayne France, host of Headspace and Timing. Andrew McDowell, host of Neophyte in the Woods, and our newest host, Benjamin Loth, hosting a show releasing soon called Branding with Benjamin. Special thanks goes out to some amazing podcast hosts who have donated their time and opinions to the series. Sam Culper of Breakers Podcast, Brad Taylor of Sofa Kings Podcast, Nick Giglio of Conspiracy Geeks Podcast, and last but certainly not least, to the man who probably had the biggest role in making Band of Brothers the series that it is today, a staple amongst military ranks and revered by all who have worn the uniform. Here's a huge salute to you, Captain Dale Dye. Owner of Warriors Inc., Dale also has a new film in the making and is planning on using veterans to be part of the cast and crew. To learn more about this and to get the links to all of the podcasts and podcast hosts mentioned, head on over to changeyourpov.com/Band of Brothers, all one word. If you like this series, share it with someone you think would like it too. Thanks for listening, and in the words of Dick Winters, I thank God for seeing me through the day of days and prayed I would make it through D+1. I also promised that if some way I could get home again, I would find a nice, peaceful town and spend the rest of my life in peace.